It was a very dark, rainy night. I remember that night, and I remember it clearly. I remember it was raining heavily as I sat at the bus stop, waiting for the rain to clear out. I remember checking my wristwatch, and I remember it being 10:47 p.m. It was in October, near Halloween. And of course, it creeps me out, spooks me out. Halloween was never my thing. I felt a numbing feeling behind me, but I brushed it off. The last bus of the night stopped right in front of me. I thought twice and boarded the bus. I paid for my ride hoping I could save it, but it would take me hours to get home because of the heavy rain. I remember walking down the aisle, looking at their blank faces. I remember the face of the bus driver. His eyes widened. I think I was about to pop out. I remember having these continuous goosebumps for every time I see their faces staring at me. Finally, I sat next to an old man. Very tall. I think he was around 6 foot. With his top hat, I couldn't see his face clearly since it bowed down. I vividly remember his stench though. His whole smell. I remember being the smell of 1,000 corpses of dead, retching animals, like crows. I remember the faces of the people on the bus looking at me, their eyes widening, their sweat dropping to the floor. They all shook their heads and stopped staring as I faced forward. After that, the bus started and was on its way again. I couldn't see the road though. The windows were fogging up because of the rain, and of course it was dark. All I can feel is a continuous goosebumps starting to feel awful. I started scratching my back. I could feel the ragged breath of the old man near my neck. It's as if he was smelling me, like some prey. I brushed it off and looked at the window. Later, I heard some clicking in my left ear. I wanted to look at it, but my instincts told me not to, so I stopped. And a while later, I heard more clicking. I thought it was the old man using his tongue to make a clicking noise to pass the time, so I closed my eyes and laid my head next to the window. I remember waking up to an ambulance siren driving next to the bus. I checked my watch and I felt dizzy and confused. The watch still said 10:47, as if time had stopped. The goosebumps stopped, but the old man's still clicking his tongue. I just thought that my watch was broken and continued to sleep. I remember its hot, rotting breath. I remember it creeping behind me. I was scared. I was scared no one was helping. I was scared of what he might do to me. I was scared of my eyes. I was scared. I am scared. To this day, I still am traumatized. I felt the need to stop it, so I opened my eyes. I could still remember their faces, the faces that were staring at me. It was all blank. No facial features at all. Nothing. But the bus had stopped, and the windows were dark, and the rain turned red. The old man sitting next to me was gone, and I was scared. I was pissing my pants out of fear, and I felt it again. The darkness creeping around me, trying to swallow me. I felt the goosebumps engulfing me. The whole presence. I started crying. I yelled out to stop, and no one was listening. I closed my eyes, but I heard the clicking sound again. I stopped. I opened my eyes. I saw it. The tall, lanky man. Its ruined top hat. Its sharp claws. I could hear his footsteps ringing in my ear. His face, I couldn't see it. But all I heard was a clicking. The next thing I knew, the people sitting weren't there. It was just me, and it stopped. It chuckled. And there it was. It revealed to me his face. It was smiling. It was a late night, rainy and dark. A young woman was driving home alone from her long day of work. Her two-seater pickup truck had been driving on steadily through the rain for the last half hour, and she still had a half hour to go before she got home. As she made the turn at the fork, she glanced down at her fuel gauge and noticed.
I need to get gas.
The needle was hovering right above the empty mark. She continued on the left fork to the gas station that was not far ahead. The station was almost empty. Only one of the cars being filled up. An old red Nissan. The woman waved a weary hello to the driver, and he waved back with equal tiredness. Apparently, she wasn't the only one driving on a long way home at night. After a bill had been paid, and her car was burping with satisfaction at its full tank, the woman climbed back in the driver's seat, started her engine, and closed the window. She had left it open to grab her wallet. Driving into the rain, as she pulled out of the gas station, she noticed the driver of the Nissan leaping into his car and speeding off behind her.
How odd. It's okay. Maybe he got an urgent phone call or something.
But the Nissan didn't pass her when it came up behind her. The man drove at the same pace as her, revving his engine loudly. What's going on? The woman wondered nervously. As she put her blinker on to turn at the right fork again, the Nissan suddenly turned his brights on, blinding her.
What the hell?
Pressing down hard on the gas and speeding ahead, the Nissan driver could keep pace, and was soon behind her again. There went the driver, flashing his lights for a few seconds before turning them down again.
Maybe he wants me to pull over. Do I have an oil leak?
But as she turned her wheel to head into the soft shoulder on the roadside, the man revved his engine powerfully, almost angrily, and again flashed his Nissan's brights, almost bumping the back of her truck as he surged forward behind her. He wanted her to keep going. The woman pressed the gas pedal down as hard as she could and watched the shadowed driver in her right side mirror. He would flash his brights for every 20 seconds or so, keeping them on for a brief time before turning them off again and revving his engine furiously. On, off. The woman's fingers gripped the wheel tighter. What would he do if she tried to get away from him? Would he force her off the road? On, off. Deciding to take the chance, the woman turned her wheel suddenly and went into the speeding lane the opposite side of the road. It was heading southbound instead of northbound. The Nissan driver kept his brights on for a long time as he skidded across the empty northbound and followed her. Oh no, he seemed to be a skilled driver. As she headed back the way she came, the woman swerved, took shortcuts, doubled back, trying to lose the Nissan, but it remained steadfastly telling her. Brights flashing blindly every few moments. On, off. Rain drove hard against the roof. On, off. The truck's tires squealed as the woman desperately tried to lose her Nissan on the overpass. On, off. The woman's hand pounded hard on the dashboard in terrible fear and frustration as the tears began to flow. On, off, on, off. Suddenly, a glowing neon sign showed itself down the road. And as the woman turned the corner, she saw the gas station. Nearly choking with relief, the woman pickup whined loudly as she gunned it towards the shelter and safety of the station. Her brakes screeched as she pulled in beside the gas pump. Before the truck even had come to a full stop, she was leaping out of it, sprinting towards the door. She burst in, out of breath and screaming, startling the old woman at the candy counter and the man sleeping in a chair in the corner.
Please help. There is someone following me. When I left here, this red Honda kept revving their engine and flashing their lights. I tried to pull over, but they did it even more.
Suddenly, the gas station's door burst open again. A man's dark figure coming in out of the storm. Having just finished her call over the phone to the police, the woman screamed, dropping the phone and fled, taking refuge in the broom closet, and locking herself in until the police arrived a few minutes later. It was only then she came out shaking from the closet and learned the truth.
As I was getting ready to pay for my gas, a man ran out of the bushes and climbed through a window into the backseat crawl space.
When the woman had driven away, the Nissan driver had taken off behind her. As he was trying to tell her to pull over, he had seen the dark figure rise up behind the seats, a knife raised in his hands.
I thought that if you pulled over, he would take that chance to kill you before you could leave your truck.
The man had done all he could and flashed his brights, casting the mysterious killer in light, causing him to duck down. He had followed the woman desperately, continually flashing his brights as the man in the back seat continued to try to stab her. After the police heard the man's story, they checked the woman's truck and found, curled up in the back seat, a serial killer that had just recently escaped from jail. A knife clutched in hand. Susan and Ned were driving through a wooded, empty section of highway. The lightning flashed, the thunder roared, and the sky went dark in the torrential downpour.
We'd better stop,
Said Susan. Ned nodded his head in agreement. He stepped on the brake, and suddenly, the car started to slide on the slick pavement. They plunged off the side of the road and slid to a halt at the bottom of an incline. Pale and shaking, Ned quickly turned to check if Susan was alright. When she nodded, Ned relaxed and looked through the rain-soaked windows.
I'm going to go check how bad it is.
He told Susan, and went out to the storm. She saw his blurry figure in the headlight, walking around the front of the car. A moment later, he jumped in beside her, soaking wet.
The car's not badly damaged, but we're wheel deep in mud. I'm going to have to go for help.
Susan swallowed nervously. There'd be no quick rescue here.
Turn off the headlights and lock the doors till I get back, okay?
Axe Murder Hollow. Although Ned had not said the name aloud, they both knew what he had been thinking when he told her to lock the car. This was the place where the woman had once taken an axe and hacked up her husband to death, in a jealous rage over an alleged affair. Supposedly, the exploding spirit of the husband continued to haunt this section of road. Outside, Susan heard a shriek, a loud thump, and a strange gurgling noise. But she couldn't see anything in the darkness. Frightened, she shrank down in her seat. She sat in silence for a while, and then noticed another sound. It was a soft sound, like something being blown by the wind. Suddenly, the car was illuminated by a bright light.
Excuse me, ma'am. Can you get out of the vehicle?
Ned must have found a police officer. Susan unlocked the door and stepped out of the car. As her eyes adjusted to the bright light, she saw it. Hanging by his feet from the tree next to the car was the dead body of Ned. His bloody throat had been cut so deep that it was nearly decapitated. The wind swung his body back and forth so that it thumped against a tree. Susan screamed and ran toward the voice of the light. She drew close and she realized the light was not coming from the flashlight. Standing there was a glowing figure of a woman with a smile on her face and a large, solid, and definitely real axe in her hand. She backed away from the glowing figure until she bumped into the car.
Playing around when my back was turned? Sleeping with another woman's husband, are we?
The ghost whispered, stroking the sharp blade of the axe with her fingers.
You have been very naughty.
The last thing she saw was the glint of the axe and the eerie, iridescent light. It all started a long time ago, in a very small town. There was a girl living in that town who was so beautiful. People had said she had to be the prettiest girl for 500 miles around. Some people said she was the most beautiful girl in the world. And that girl's name was Maria. But because Maria was so beautiful, she thought she was better than everyone else. She came from a good, hard-working family. They had a nice home, she had pretty clothes to wear, but she wasn't satisfied. She deserved much better things. And when she was a young woman, she would have nothing to do with the men from her town, or the villages nearby. They weren't good enough for her. Many times she was talking with her grandma in the evening, the way young people used to back in the day. And she would tell the grandma,
Grandma, when I get married, I'm going to marry the most handsome man in the world.
and her grandma would just shake her head. But Maria would go on. She'd look out across the hillside and say,
His hair will be as black and as shiny as the raven sitting on that tree over there. When he moves, he will be as strong and as graceful as the stallion my abuelito has in his corral.
and her grandma would tell her, Maria, caras vemos, corazones no sabemos. It's an old saying. It means that we can see people's faces, but we don't know what's in their hearts. And she would tell her, if you're gonna marry a man, you be sure he's a good man. That he has a good heart in him. Why are you always talking about his face? But Maria thought,
Oh, these old people. They have old-fashioned ideas. They don't know anything.
and she wouldn't listen to her grandma. Then one day, a man came to town. He had seemed to be just the man that she had been talking about. He had been a cowboy out on the Llano Estacado. He could ride anything. In fact, if he was riding a horse and it got well trained, he would give that horse away and go rope him a new horse. He thought it wasn't manly for him to ride a horse that wasn't half wild. And he was handsome. All the girls were falling in love with him. He could play the guitar, he could sing beautifully. And Maria made up her mind. That was the man she was going to marry. But I told you how proud she was, so of course she would never let on. If they passed on the street and he would say hello, she would just look away. He came to her house in the evening and played his guitar and sang for her. She wouldn't even come to the window. And before long, the cowboy made up his mind.
That proud girl, Maria. I can win her heart. I think I'll marry that girl.
So things turned out just the way Maria had wanted them. And before long, they're gonna be married. Her parents told her, don't marry him. He won't make a steady husband. But she wouldn't listen to her parents. She got married. And for a while, things were fine. They had 2 children. They seemed to be a happy family. But after a few years, the cowboy went back to the field and life of the prairies. He would leave the town and be gone for months at a time. And when he came home, he would tell Maria,
I didn't come to see you. I just want to visit my children for a while.
he would sit and play with his children. Then he would go off to the bars and drink wine and gamble all night long with his friends. He talked about putting Maria aside and marrying a rich woman. Well, as proud as Maria was, she'd become jealous. Very jealous. And also, she began to feel jealous of her own children. Because he paid attention to them, but he just ignored her. And one evening, she was standing in front of the house with the 2 children beside her. He came riding in with a carriage, with an elegant lady in the seat beside him. He stopped and he spoke to his children, but he didn't even look at Maria. He just drove up the street. And when that happened, something just seemed to snap inside Maria. She felt such anger and jealousy, and it all turned against her children. She grabbed her 2 children by the arm and dragged them down to the river with her. And even though it's a sad thing to tell, the story says that she threw her own children into the river. But as they disappeared downstream, she realized what she had done. And she ran down the bank of the river, reaching out her arms, as if she can get them back from the water. But they were long gone. She ran on, driven by guilt and anger that was filling her heart. She wasn't paying attention to where she was going, and her foot got caught on a root. She tripped and fell backward, and her forehead struck a rock as she was killed. The next day, they looked for her all over town and they couldn't find her. And then someone brought the word into town that her body was out on the riverbank. They went out and found her, and they laid her to rest in the very spot where she had fallen. But the first night she was in the grave, she could not rest at peace. She was up and walking all along the river. She was dressed in a long, winding sheet, the way a body dressed for burial would. They saw her moving among the trees, and they could hear her voice, crying and crying through the night. Sometimes they thought it was just the wind, but other times, if they listened carefully, they were sure they could hear the words. But it sounds something like this.
I miss Heroes. Where are my children?
She was crying. And she went up and down the riverbank, all through the arroyos, into the mountains, down long ditches and canals and the Equius. Night after night they saw her, but especially they'd hear her crying outside.
Where are my children?
And so, before long, no one spoke of her as Maria anymore. They called her La Llorona, the crying woman La Llorona. And they told their children,
when it gets dark, get back inside the house, because La Llorona could be around here looking for her children. She's so crazy, if she sees you, she won't know if it's you or her own child. She'll pick you up and carry you away, or she'll throw you into the river like she did her own children, and you will never be seen again.
They say that through the years, many children have been carried away by La Llorona. One man even told me this. When he was a boy, he had a friend who did not believe that story. His friend would say,
"Oh, that's the story parents made up to scare kids and make them come home at night."
there's no such thing as La Llorona. Well, the boys were down by the river one evening, and it got late. The other boys started to say, let's get back. It's getting dark. Not that one boy.
"No, I'm having fun. I'm gonna stay right here."
They couldn't believe it. Aren't you afraid of La Llorona? And he just laughed at them.
Come on, you don't believe that, do you? There's no such thing.
So they went home and he stayed there all by himself. He was throwing cans and sticks into the river, hitting them with rocks as they came by. It got really dark, and the moon started to rise. Then all of a sudden, he felt an icy cold wind was blowing through his clothes and all around him. There were dogs barking. He looked around and there was a white shape coming through the trees and getting nearer. He tried to turn and run, but he was so frightened. He couldn't move. He just stood there trembling, and the shape got closer until you can hear the high wailing.
I miss Heroes. Where are my children?
But he still couldn't run away, so he crouched down as small as he could. Just hoped that she wouldn't see him. And suddenly he heard her say,
horse.
She said and came toward him. His face was as white as a sheet that La Llorona was wearing. But he couldn't run away. She came to him and reached out with her long, twisted fingers, and she took hold of his shoulders. When La Llorona touched his shoulders, it felt like icicles were cutting into his skin. Just then, when La Llorona was about to pick him up and carry him away, back in town, the church bell started ringing, calling people for mass. And when the church bell rang, a prayer went through the boy's mind. When that happened, La Llorona dropped him, and she disappeared through the trees. He stayed there for a long time before he had his strength back. When he was finally able to run home, his mother was angry. She said,
Where have you been? You should have been home hours ago.
Mama, La Llorona.
What? Don't you go making up stories about La Llorona. You should have been home a long time ago.
and she reached out. She was going to give him a good shaking. But when she reached out to take a hold of his shoulders, she saw on each of the shoulders there were 5 red marks, like 5 bloodstains, that had been left by La Llorona's fingers. And then she believed him. She took that shirt and washed it over and over, but she could never get the stains out. The man who told me about that and said when he was a boy, she would come around the neighborhood and show them the shirt.
Look here, you can just count these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These red marks were left by La Llorona's fingers. When it gets dark, get home because La Llorona can carry children away.
You can bet the kids in that neighborhood, when it got dark, they were home. But I've never seen that shirt, so I'm not gonna swear that story's true. I'm just someone who remembered an interesting story I and many other Hispanic children were told.